possible. But he was mostly an honest man, but he could use a person's weaknesses to get his wishes. Back at the Mason office, Della had found out something that was in the back of a magazine. However, it drew her attention. There was a mention that perhaps Dean Kirk was a member of the gay community. She had nothing against that and was for gay rights, but some people did not feel as she did, and she knew that some gay people would go to very extreme ends to protect their secret. But what if that was true? Who was Dean seeing behind his wife's back? Could he have murdered Jason because he had found out their secret? She was going to have to dig into that a little deeper. Perry had been busy going through his legal books and reading up on similar murder cases, hoping that he would find a clue as to who the murderer was. He knew that Paul and Della were very good at finding out facts about people, and he had the legal knowledge. Usually between the three of them they could solve a murder case within a week, and this case had already taken 2 weeks. There was going to be a pre-trial meeting the next week, and Perry hoped that he would have the answer to the question of who the murderer was by that time. But for now, he had no idea at all. Della and Perry worked the entire day, and when it was 7 they called it a day. To be quite truthful, Della had not found anything else in all of the articles that she had looked at except for the reference to Dean Kirk being a closet gay. Della and Perry walked out to their cars, and this time Perry asked Della to come to his apartment. He did not want what had happened the night before to happen again. He wanted them to have some supper and then continue with the investigation into the murder. Paul was still out working on the case too. He could come up and talk to him at the penthouse. Della and Perry stopped at the deli that was downstairs in his building and got a couple of sandwiches to hold them over for a long tiring night of that. They were both sure there was something that they were missing, and they both knew it. It was going to be a night of work, not a night of fun. But for a few minutes they would relax and have their supper. As they sat at the table and ate their sandwiches, the two of them were deep in thought. They both were worried about the case and the fact that there was going to be a pre-trial hearing that week, and they had no information to bring into court. They were both worried. They also knew that Trag and Berger were both working hard and probably had information that they had not found as of yet. Della decided that tonight she would work on the information from the computer. She had her laptop and sat down and went to work. Perry also was working very hard when the doorbell rang. It was Paul, and Perry told him to come on up. Paul had worked all day and most of the night following around Doug Fielding. He had to be one of the most boring people he had ever met. When he finally went outside, he just went to work and then went home. He had another man watching him at the moment, but to say that his life was dull was a stretch. Doug Fielding's life was a ho-hum. Paul could not find anything about him, except that he was friends with Dean Kirk. Other than that, nothing. He was working on it and was hoping to have more information by tomorrow. Della spoke up then, and on a hunch she asked him, "Have you heard any rumors that he might be a gay man?" Paul raised his eyebrow and asked her, "Why do you ask that question?" Della then told Paul and Perry of the rumors that she had read about Dean Kirk being gay. "I have been working on that angle, perhaps some kind of triangle," she said with a questioning look. Perry jumped up and told her, "That is why we keep you around, Della. You are right, I had read about that in a magazine a long time ago. We should look into that possibility. We are desperate." Perry told the two of them. "I will check that out and should have an answer sometime tomorrow, guys. Right now I am headed home to see Paul, JR and Sue before they forget who I am." Paul told them and walked out the door to the elevator and home. Perry leaned over and looked at Della's computer. "Keep looking into your idea, Della. People have been murdered for less reasons. I want you to keep looking up information on Dean and his wife Tara. Find out what you can about their marriage also. Perry and Della continued to work for the next 2 hours, and then Della had to get up and stretch. She looked over at Perry, who is still working on his law books. He looked tired too, and it was time for her to go home, and she knew it. Della walked over to Perry and put her hands on his shoulders and started massaging them. "You are very tight, counselor," she whispered into his hair. His beautiful black curly hair. He still had a full head of thick hair that smelled so good, she could almost taste it. Perry stopped and took her hands. "It is time for us to call it a night, Della. We still have a lot to find out, but we are getting closer to the truth. I can feel it. Come on, I will walk you to your car," and with that he gently kissed her. It had been a good day, and as they said their goodnights, they both knew that they would be seeing each other once again in about 10 hours. The morning was going to come quick, and Della was very tired. She needed her sleep. The next morning Della was surprised to find Paul in the office helping himself to a cup of coffee. It was not often that Paul was there before she or Perry was. "This is a pleasant surprise, Paul. What brings you here so early in the morning?" she asked. "I found myself thinking about your thoughts on the murder and got to looking into the private lives of the 3 people that you thought might be involved a little deeper. It seems that Dean and his wife have been not getting along for a long time. He sleeps in another room, and she goes on vacations without him. As far as our man Doug Fielding, he has been seen going to some of the local gay bars, but he keeps this a secret. He is dating a lady named Brenda Gold. She is a little rough around the corners, but I don't think she is that bad," Paul told her. "I wanted Perry to have that information before I left for another day of investigating," he told her with a smile. "You can tell him for me?" "Thanks," and with that Paul headed out. About half an hour later Perry came in, and Della told him what he had found out. "He thinks that the murderer is one of them. He thinks that someone got jealous of the triangle. I was thinking that maybe Jason had tried to blackmail one of them, and that is what got them killed. Personally, I think that it was a woman that killed him. It was with a gun, and a woman can handle that weapon just as good as a man. If she caught Jason by surprise, he would not have been a match against a gun, woman or man holding onto the trigger," Della told him. Perry agreed that it was a possibility. "Did you find out anything else about the 2 women?" "No, I am working on that right now, and so isn't Paul," Della told him. "You go ahead with your research. I think that it might be going in the right direction," Perry told her. "I need to go to court with more papers, and will be back in time for lunch. Wait for me, Miss Street." "All right," and with that he kissed her on the top of the head and headed out to the courthouse one more time. It had been a good day, and as they said their goodnights, they both knew that they would be seeing each other once again in about 10 hours. The morning was going to come quick, and Della was very tired. She needed her sleep. The next morning Della was surprised to find Paul in the office helping himself to a cup of coffee. It was not often that Paul was there before she or Perry was. "This is a pleasant surprise, Paul. What brings you here so early in the morning?" she asked. "I found myself thinking about your thoughts on the murder and got to looking into the private lives of the 3 people that you thought might be involved a little deeper. It seems that Dean and his wife have been not getting along for a long time. He sleeps in another room, and she goes on vacations without him. As far as our man Doug Fielding, he has been seen going to some of the local gay bars, but he keeps this a secret. He is dating a lady named Brenda Gold. She is a little rough around the corners, but I don't think she is that bad," Paul told her. "I wanted Perry To have that information before I left for another day of investigating, he told her with a smile. You can tell him for me? Thanks. And with that Paul headed out. About half an hour later Perry came in and Della told him what he had found out. He thinks that the murderer is one of them. He thinks that someone got jealous of the triangle. I was thinking that maybe Jason had tried to blackmail one of them and that is what got them killed. Personally, I think that it was a woman that killed him. It was with a gun, and a woman can handle that weapon just as good as a man. If she caught Jason by surprise, he would not have been a match against a gun, woman or man holding onto the trigger. Della told him. Perry agreed that it was a possibility. Did you find out anything else about the two women? No, I am working on that right now, and so isn't Paul. Della told him. You go ahead with your research, I think that it might be going in the right direction. Perry told her. I need to go to court with more papers, and will be back in time for lunch. Wait for me, Miss Street. All right, and with that he kissed her on the top of the head and headed out to the courthouse one more time. Della spent the day working on any information she could find out about either Brenda Gold or Dean's wife Tara. There were many articles in the society page about Tara Kirk, but she could not find anything about Brenda Gold. She apparently was not a society woman, but with some digging she found her Facebook page. There Della found out a lot of information about Brenda. Brenda was a supporter of the lesbian community and was shown at many of their rallies. It was in one of her pictures that Della found out what she had been looking for. There, in one of the photos, was Brenda and Tara Kirk, and they looked very chubby. Della could not wait to show Perry the picture. Perry came back from court looking tired and hungry. He had been at the courthouse for over 3 hours working with Berger and going over the briefs. Hamilton Berger had wanted his client Jerry Diamond to take a plea. He had to talk to Jerry and tell him of the offer. He did not want him to take it, and he was going to recommend against it, but his client had the right to know of the offer that had been made. Della smiled as Perry came in. He smiled at her and asked her if she was still hungry. I am starved, it's already after 2, you know, she told him with a smile. But I do have something that I would like you to see. I found a picture online that might catch your eye. Della opened the Facebook page up and enlarged the photo that had caught her eye earlier that morning. Take a look at the picture right here. It is a gay rights demonstration, and I recognize the two women hugging together. Perry took a look, and indeed it was the elusive Brenda Gold and Tara Kirk. So there was something going on there that he had not seen before. Now he had to figure out which one of them was the guilty person. He was sure that one of the 4 was the murderer. He would wait to hear from Paul, but for now he and Della needed to eat lunch. The two walked together down the hallway to the elevator hand in hand once again. The two of them went to eat at the local cafe that was just a few feet from the office. There they could enjoy their dinner and be left alone. Paula, the waitress, knew the famous Perry Mason and his secretary well and knew that they wanted their privacy. They usually had just a sandwich and a cup of coffee for their lunch, and Mr. Mason was a wonderful tipper. Perry took Della's hands and held them across the table once again. He wished that he had the nerve to sit next to her in the booth, but then they would be crowded, and so he would just hold her beautiful slender hands and smile. What a fool I am. I have been with her for 5 years and we are not married yet. That day might come, he would have to think about it. How could he ask someone to marry him? He was always chasing murderers and working all hours of the night. It was no way for a lady like Della to live. What was he thinking? That was how her life was now. He was such a lucky man. How did he ever find her, Or did she find him? There was no doubt about it. Perry Mason, you have managed to fall in love heads over heels, he thought to himself. That afternoon Della had to do some catching up of the other paperwork that had to be done in a busy attorney's office, and so she did not have much time to look up more information on the two women that had caught her interest. She thought to herself that she was going to look at the Facebook page once again, and see if there was any other information on there. Social media, people put their most personal information on it. Della knew that if they were secret lovers she could find more information on line. She just had to look a little deeper. That night Perry closed the office at 7, and this time Della insisted that he come to her home and have a good home-cooked meal. She had made a meatloaf that morning and it would be ready in about 1/2 an hour. She would cut up some potatoes and cook him some corn on the cob. It had been very hot the last few days, and they said that the temperature had reached over 100 degrees that day. They needed the time together to relax, so she poured him a large glass of lemonade. Perry was very fond of Della's meatloaf and the lemonade tasted great. He was sitting at the table when Lori and Mike came in. "This is a pleasant surprise. We have not seen either one of you in days, it seems. This must be some kind of case." Lori smiled as she hugged her sister and Perry. "Always busy, but dinner will be done soon. Go ahead and wash up, the meatloaf will be done in about 15 minutes. I have made potatoes and corn on the cob too," Della told them with a smile. "Oh Della, you are spoiling me. I think that between you and Lori I have gained about 10 pounds. Mike laughed. The dinner was good, and as they were eating Lori smiled at her sister. "We chose the country club to have our wedding at. We will be getting married in 6 months from today exactly," she smiled at Mike, who was beaming ear to ear. "Well, congratulations," Della and Perry cried out to their friends and sister. Mike turned to Perry and asked him, "I know that Lori wants Della to be her maid of honor, but I would like to ask you to be my best man." Perry smiled. "I would be honored, Mike. The country club will be a wonderful place, and the ride through the park in the carriage is a great idea too. Della and I wish the two of you the best." And with that Perry stood up and reached over to Lori and gave her a hug. It had been a great day after all. Now they had the date, and Della was to be the maid of honor and Perry the best man. It was going to be a wonderful wedding. Della was going to make sure of it. She wanted nothing but the best for her sister. That night the four played a game of cards and then watched a game on the television and ate popcorn. For once the four of them had a normal night with nothing to do with work interfering with the fun. Every time that Della started thinking about work she thought of Perry. Thinking of him made her forget everything. Perry and Mike left together that night just after the game was over, and for once Della and Lori got to go to bed at a normal time, 11:30. Della looked at her flowers as she got into bed. They were dying. She was afraid she was going to have to throw them away either tomorrow or the next day, of that she was sure. Paul had been working all day trying to get information on any of the four suspects. He was sure, as was Della and Perry, that one of them had committed the murder, and he wanted to find out which one it was. He thought about how Brenda and Tara had probably gotten angry or jealous about their boyfriends and husbands' affair. It was probably more of a worry to Tara that would be the most upset, because of her standing in the community. She would want to protect that standing, of that he was sure. Paul had spent the day watching Brenda. She had now gone to a hotel in the less desirable part of town, and he was waiting there in the shadows to see who she was going to meet here. He had not been sitting outside for long when a car pulled up, a big blue Cadillac. Tara Kirk got out of the car and went right to the room that Brenda Gold had just gone into. Paul then went around the back to see if he could hear what was being said. He peeked through the slightly parted dirty old curtain and looked. The two women were busy making love to each other. And with that Paul left. So Della had been right, they were having a gay affair. She wondered if Dean knew about it. That was when he spotted a man that he had seen one other time, hanging around Brenda Gold's house. He did not have the appearance of a police officer, he looked like a private eye or something. Then he remembered where he had seen him before. He worked for Dean Kirk. The man saw him but made no move toward him. He must be looking into what is going on as I am. Dean Kirk is probably very mad, but was he capable of murder? Paul knew that he now needed to call Perry. When Paul called Perry he could tell that for once he had woken him up. Perry was always waking him up, and it was a welcome change to Paul that he now had the chance to do the same thing to his friend, the attorney that was known to keep all-night stakeouts. Paul told Perry what he had seen and heard. And Perry told him to meet him in the office early in the morning. Della was pleasantly surprised once more to see Perry there before she was at the office that morning. He had not slept there, she could tell. There was no sign that he had slept on the couch, and he looked as if he had a good night's sleep. "Good morning, Perry. What brings you to the office so early in the morning?" She smiled at him as she opened her laptop. "I got a call from Paul last night. Your hunch was right. Brenda Gold and Tara Kirk are lovers. Paul found them at a motel just outside of town in a compromising position. I just now have to figure out why they murdered Jason and who the true murderer was," he told her. Perry had been thinking about this since he had gotten up, and he needed to know about each of their personalities, and which one of them stood to lose the most should the secret get out. When Paul came in, he would have Paul do some more checking. Paul showed up almost exactly at 9, looking refreshed. It seemed that once he had found out that the two women were having an affair, he had been able to go to sleep and had almost 7 hours of sleep that night. It was a rare time that he got that much sleep all at once. "Well, how can I be of assistance to the two of you today?" he asked. "I definitely know that Jason Fielding had received a large sum of money a few months back. Now I had always assumed that he received that as a payoff to make sure that Jerry sold the building to Kirk. But, what if he received some of the money through blackmail? I want to have you look into any money that might have come out or into any of the 4 suspects' bank accounts in the last few months. Can you do that for me today?" Perry asked him. "I am right on it and should have your answer by this evening," he told him, and with a bow to Della, he walked out the back door once again. Perry was very worried about what was happening, and another weekend was coming up. He needed to see Jerry Diamond and tell him about the offer that the district attorney had made him. So off Perry headed to the clock shop after promising Della he would be back in the earlier part of the afternoon. "You had better get your own lunch, Della. I will probably still be with Jerry, and with that." He gave her a quick kiss on the top of her head and left for Jerry's clock shop. As Perry opened the door to the clock shop, he heard the familiar sound of a bell to let Jerry know that a customer had entered the shop. Jerry was glad to see Perry Mason. He was hoping that his lawyer had information on the case. Perhaps he had solved the case and he was here to tell him that. Mr. Mason smiled at him and asked him to take a seat. "I was in the courthouse and spoke to the district attorney about your case. The district attorney would like to make a plea deal with you. He would like you to agree to just 20 years in prison for a manslaughter charge." Perry watched Jerry's face and knew that the man was not going to accept such a plea. It was an insult to an innocent man, and Perry knew that too well. as she opened her laptop. "I got a call from Paul last night. Your hunch was right. Brenda Gold and Tara Kirk are lovers. Paul found them at a motel just outside of town in a compromising position. I just now have to figure out why they murdered Jason and who the true murderer was," he told her. Perry had been thinking about this since he had gotten up, and he needed to know about each of their personalities, and which one of them stood to lose the most should the secret get out. When Paul came in, he would have Paul do some more checking. Paul showed up almost exactly at 9, looking refreshed. It seemed that once he had found out that the two women were having an affair, he had been able to go to sleep and had almost 7 hours of sleep that night. It was a rare time that he got that much sleep all at once. "Well, how can I be of assistance to the two of you today?" he asked. "I definitely know that Jason Fielding had received a large sum of money a few months back. Now I had always assumed that he received that as a payoff to make sure that Jerry sold the building to Kirk. But, what if he received some of the money through blackmail? I want to have you look into any money that might have come out or into any of the 4 suspects' bank accounts in the last few months. Can you do that for me today?" Perry asked him. "I am right on it and should have your answer by this evening," he told him, and with a bow to Della, he walked out the back door once again. Perry was very worried about what was happening, and another weekend was coming up. He needed to see Jerry Diamond and tell him about the offer that the district attorney had made him. So off Perry headed to the clock shop after promising Della he would be back in the earlier part of the afternoon. "You had better get your own lunch, Della. I will probably still be with Jerry, and with that," he gave her a quick kiss on the top of her head and left for Jerry's clock shop. As Perry opened the door to the clock shop, he heard the familiar sound of a bell to let Jerry know that a customer had entered the shop. Jerry was glad to see Perry Mason. He was hoping that his lawyer had information on the case. Perhaps he had solved the case and he was here to tell him that. Mr. Mason smiled at him and asked him to take a seat. "I was in the courthouse and spoke to the district attorney about your case. The district attorney would like to make a plea deal with you. He would like you to agree to just 20 years in prison for a manslaughter charge." Perry watched Jerry's face and knew that the man was not going to accept such a plea. It was an insult to an innocent man, and Perry knew that too well. "Mr. Mason, I did not hurt anyone. Do you think that I should accept this offer?" Jerry asked him. "No, I do not. But because it has been offered to you, I had to let you know of your options. We are very close to finding out who the real murderer is. Hold tight. Everything is going to be all right," Perry promised him. They shook hands and Perry left the shop. Sometimes it takes something very simple to let you see the truth. Perry was walking down the street in deep thought when he finally knew who the murderer was. He wanted to check things out once again. So he went to Kathy Fielding's house. He had a couple of questions for her first. Perry had to go to the courthouse and talk to Berger and file some more motions, and he decided to walk that day. The clock shop was only a mile from the courthouse, and by the time he parked his car and walked, he would have walked the mile anyways. So he walked through the busy, bustling street where the Thompson Industries were building the new condos. Perry looked up and saw the other building in the area that had not been sold. It was a building that now contained 4 apartments and 2 storefronts. As he started to walk by, he saw a lady in one of the shops and decided to stop by and talk to her. She was a pretty lady in her 40s. She was selling some nicely laid out antiques. Perry looked over some of the things and she came up to him. "Can I help you?" she asked him. "I am looking. You have some lovely things, and I am looking for a wedding present for a couple of friends of mine," he told her. "I see that there is a lot of new construction here. What is going on? Perry asked. One of those big out-of-town contractors came in and bought nearly every building in the block. Now they are making them all look new and polished. But in the meantime they are destroying the history of the city. Most of these buildings were built at the beginning of the century and have character. When Thompson Industries are done they will be squeaky clean but sterile, she told him. I noticed that you are the other building over there with the clock shop in it are about all of the buildings that are left as they were. I think that they should keep the character also. My name is Mason and I am looking into why Thompson Industries is doing this and also am investigating a murder, he told the lady with a serious face. My name is Becky Nelson and I am glad to meet you. Jerry Diamond did not murder that man. He is a gentle soul, and even though Jason wanted him to sell the property, why would he kill him? The building belongs to him, not his daughter and son-in-law. His son was truly thinking of his father-in-law when Jason was trying to get Jerry to sell the building. He loved his wife very much. I feel very sorry for Kathy. They had a tough go of it for a while and Jerry did gamble, but they loved each other very much, she told him. Perry had found an antique vest that would work perfectly for a wedding or a shower gift and paid for his purchase. The lady was right, they had found nothing to indicate any problems with Jason and Kathy. The murder was about blackmail, he was sure of it now. Jason was desperate for money and somehow found out about the affair the four of them were having and blackmailed them. After Perry stopped by the courthouse and talked to Berger, he headed back to his car. It was a shame what the developer was doing to the area, but that was what they called progress. Perry had noticed a man watching him, he thought. But he had just seen him in the reflection of the window and he was now sure that the man was trailing him. He walked around the corner and waited. Sure enough, the man came down the sidewalk and started to make the turn, practically walking right into Perry. Excuse me, he told Perry, obviously embarrassed. Perry turned and said, young man, you have been following me, why may I ask? No, I work for Thompson Industries and apparently we just have the same destination. That is all. I had to go to court about a speeding ticket and now I am headed back to work, he told him. Well, you made a wrong turn. Thompson Industries is across the street. Now, what do you really want of me? Perry asked with a threatening tone. All right, I was trying to find out information on the murder of Jason Fielding. My boss wanted to know if I could find out anything about the murder and I have been looking into it, he told him. My name is Max. Thank you for your time. I cannot help you because I do not know who the murderer is myself. But the murderer will get caught, of that I am positive, and with that the two men parted. When Perry got back to the office he found Della busy at work at her desk. She was still looking over the news for information on any of the four suspects. He waved her into his office and smiled at her. I know who the murderer is, Della. There can be only one unless Paul has a surprise for me when he comes back with the financial information on the two ladies, Brenda Gold and Tara Kirk. And do you want to enlighten me? She asked with a smile. Perry looked up from his papers and started to answer her when the familiar knock came on the door. Della got up and answered it to find Paul there with a smile on his face. He took a seat in his favorite chair and opened up his notebook. I have finished my investigation of the money situation with all four of the suspects. Thompson Industries and Tara and Dean Kirk is doing very well. This project has cost them some, but the money is starting to flow back into the bank and they will both be financially sound soon. But the money that started the business was Tara's money. She keeps a separate account and that is what took me so long. Someone has been taking her for a long ride. She has paid out at least $50,000 to someone. The last payment was taken out on the day that Jason was murdered, in the amount of $15,000. The problem was that there was no trail of money until I looked into a separate account that Kathy Fielding has. She has been the one who has been depositing the money, not Jason. Perry and Della had been listening intently to Paul, and they both knew that with the blackmail, there was a good chance that Jason was involved. "Is there anything else for me?" he asked. "Not right now, but I am looking into it and will let you know as soon as I hear something. I promise," Paul told them. With that, Paul was on his way back out to work. Perry looked at Della and said, "I think that we need to go see Kathy again. She has some explaining to do, and we better go right now. If we can find out this information, so can the police." And with that, Della and Perry left the office once more to talk to Kathy. Della called the house and Kathy answered. She would be at home, and so when Perry and Della came, she was waiting at the front door for them. This time Kathy was worried. She had a feeling that they may have found out the truth, and she realized it was time for her to admit it. Della and Perry were welcomed into the home, and they took a seat on the couch. Perry looked at Kathy with his big kind eyes and asked her, "Do you have something that you want to tell us?" Kathy looked down and then at the two people who had never been anything but kind to her and started to tell them the entire truth. She took a deep breath and spoke. "About a year ago, Jason started gambling again. I knew it because of the phone calls and the threatening messages. I talked to Jason and he began to go to Gambler Anonymous, but he was in debt very deep with some bad characters. I did not have the money and had borrowed from my father over and over. I just did not know what to do, so I got a job as a maid part-time at a local hotel. At the hotel I saw Mrs. Kirk and another lady that I got to know as Brenda Gold frequenting the hotel. I do not care if they are gay, that was not it. Tara was married to the man who was trying to destroy my father's life, and I knew that she would pay for me not to tell her husband what was going on. We never met Mr. Mason. I just sent her photos and the money would be put in my account. It worked well until Jason got killed. Poor Jason had no idea what I was doing, and he might have been killed because of this." Kathy started to cry, and Della felt sincerely sorry for her. Perry looked at her in amazement. Did she really think that nothing was going to happen when you take someone for $50,000? Of course they were going to come looking for who was doing the blackmail and put a stop to it if they could. Perry had seen many people murdered for less money than that. He asked her, "What do you know of Brenda Gold?" "I never really have gotten to know her or Tara, because I did not want them to notice me. I would clean their room and leave. But I did notice that Brenda seemed to be from money also. She drove an expensive car, and more than once when she left she was wearing a fur coat." Kathy told him. "I do not know if I can keep your blackmail out of the courtroom, because I will do anything to save your father from prison. Do you understand why?" he asked her. "Yes, I understand and know that what I was doing was illegal, but I was desperate for money. I will not let my father go to prison either, and I certainly did not think that my husband would be murdered because of the blackmail either. I am so sorry," Kathy told them as they left the house. Della got into the car quietly. What a terrible thing that had happened, and she could not believe that Kathy would do something so terrible as blackmailing someone. I am sure that Kathy thought that nothing would happen to her or husband, and now she will have to live with that for the rest of her life. She shook her head and looked up at Perry with very sad eyes. After being in this business for so long, Della, I am sorry to say that not too much surprises me anymore. I do hope that Kathy tells her father the truth before he learns it from another source. Her father has been through a lot because of this murder and deserves to hear the truth from her. Even though they were driving, he put his arm around her. She was his rock, and Perry could feel comfort knowing that Della would never do anything like that to anyone. Perry had not noticed until now, but he was getting hungry. So he glanced at the car clock. It was almost 2 o'clock, and he knew that Della and him were in for one of those very late nights. I am starting to get hungry, Della. How about you? He gave her a twinkle of his eyes, and Della's heart melted. I am getting hungry too. When I am at work, I have to grab a bite whenever there is time. She smiled up at him and pointed to an Italian restaurant on the corner. The food smelled delicious as they walked in the door. Neither one of them had ever been there, and they were pleased by their little discovery. Perry took his customary seat across from Della and smiled. I find it hard to concentrate on eating while you are across the table from me. Della blushed and gave him a little laugh. Oh, Perry. As Perry went to sit down, he was reminded of the gift that he had bought at the antique store that morning. He could feel the box in his coat pocket, and took it out. I have a surprise for you. Today when I went to see Jerry, I stopped at an antique store nearby and found something for Lori and Mike's wedding. He handed her the box. Della took the box carefully and unwrapped a vase. It was a beautiful vase with little dolphins on the top. It must have been expensive, as it was very old. It's beautiful, Perry. I know that they will both love it. She wanted to kiss him, but they were across the table from each other, so just smiled at him. I wanted something to decorate their home after they get married. When I saw the dolphins on it, I knew that I had to get it for them, Perry told her. The waiter brought the check and they were off to work once again. Never much time when they were on a case. The office was busy as usual, and Perry waited impatiently to hear from Paul. Della was still working on some information on both of the women now, Tara and Brenda. As she looked through the many pages on Brenda's Facebook page, she found that she had attended San Francisco Bay College, so she thought that she would look at some of the pages and see if there was anything. Della had been looking for hours when she finally saw something that caught her eye. She found a picture of Brenda, but her name was not Brenda Gold, it was under her maiden name of Gladstone. Della knew that she had heard the name Gladstone, so she Googled the name. There under the name Gladstone was the name Dennis Gladstone. He was a large shipping magnate and was by most accounts a multi-millionaire. Under his information was his daughter Brenda. Therewith his wife and family was Brenda Gold. Della got up and went right to Perry with the information. This was very intriguing, because something had just come to his mind. Gladstone had been getting into real estate, he thought. Perhaps he was a developer? He needed to call Paul right away. Paul picked the phone up on the second ring and said that he was at home. Grabbing something to eat? Paul, the first need you to find out all of the information that you can about a man named Dennis Gladstone. He is a shipping magnate from San Francisco, and he is Brenda Gold's father. All right, I have a good man that works in San Francisco. I should be able to get back to you by tomorrow morning on it. I will call him right away. And with that Paul hung up. Della, we are very close to this murder mystery. It is now almost 6 o'clock and it is going to be a long night. If you want, we could go to my apartment or stay here, he asked her. Now this was a dilemma to Della. She wanted to work, yes, they were way too close to solving the murder, but sometimes it was not all work and play at the apartment. But she smiled and said, "Let's go to your apartment. But first let's pick up something to eat. I know that I am going to be starved before I go home," she told him with a smile. "That is a dear young lady. I am getting tired of looking at these four walls and I need a change of scenery. How about a dinner with a big steak before we go to work one more time?" He smiled, and the two of them walked out of the office one more time. Dinner was delicious and Della enjoyed the steak. The last few days had been so busy that she and Perry had been eating nothing but sandwiches and hamburgers. Just one time had she found the time to make them a homemade meal of meatloaf. The restaurant was one of their favorites and the owner took care of them personally. By the time Perry and Della got to his apartment, it was after 8. Della was going to look a little deeper into Dennis Gladstone and his daughter. She was sure that he could have been financing the blackmail. If Brenda was the person who was funding the money, he was still waiting to make sure of that. The money did come from Tara Kirk's bank account, but she might have been getting the money from her lover. She wanted to check it out very carefully. This was a murder. Perry and Della worked until after 11 and Perry had gotten up to have a smoke and relax his eyes. Although he would smoke in the apartment when he was alone, when Della was there he would step outside through his sliding doors to think and smoke. Della looked up at the man that she loved and smiled. Perry never put himself first, even in his own home. He was the gentleman. She walked up to the doors and stepped outside into the warm dry air. The view was fantastic and she took his arm and put her head on his shoulder. He smiled at her and looked out over the city with her. They must have stood there for over 10 minutes just looking and listening to the cars. When they heard the sound of the bell indicating that someone was on their way up to the penthouse, Perry was surprised, because of the hour, and looked at the security camera. It was Paul, and he knew that Paul must have found out something important or he would have waited until the morning. When Paul knocked on the door, Perry opened it and invited him in. Paul was surprised to find Della there at such a late hour, but saw her laptop and the pile of papers at Perry's desk and knew that they had been very busy that evening. But so had he, and he had wanted to tell Perry what he had learned. "I heard from my man in San Francisco and he had some interesting things to say about Dennis Gladstone. About 2 years ago he started a real estate development firm and he and Thompson Industries are bitter competitors. It seems that he knew of his daughter's love for Tara Kirk and had tried to influence her to help him with a corporate takeover. But Brenda would not go along and she went and told Tara what was happening. When he found out that Brenda was here in LA and seeing Tara again, he came down and tried to force Brenda to come back to San Francisco with him. Brenda still refused, but the word is on the street that she told him that she was being blackmailed and that her father took care of the problem for good, and with that Paul sat back and waited for Perry's take on it. "Okay Paul, tomorrow I want you to go back to Jason Fielding's neighborhood once again and show pictures of Dennis Gladstone. I want to know if anyone has seen him or not sometime around the murder. He had the motive and the opportunity. I will be glad to." "Do you have anything for me?" Paul asked. "All I have found is that Tara Kirk and Brenda have been lovers for a long time. Brenda was married for a very short time at her parents' insistence, and during that time Tara married Dean Kirk. Her parents wanted her to marry also. I think that it is sad situation all around. No one is happy, and when Dean finds out he will not be happy either. I think that Doug Fielding is nothing more to Dean Kirk than a spy for Jerry. The night that his car had stayed at his house all night, it was because it had broken down and it was towed in the morning. Dean had Tara pick him up and there. That was the reason why the car was there. No other reasons," Della told Paul. Perry had been quiet, thinking about what he had heard. He was sure that the murderer was right in front of him, and another day had gone by. "I think that the answer will be with Mr. Gladstone. Either him or one of his workers must have done the murder. But we need to prove that he was in the area." "What I am going to get is a court order for all the information on his credit cards. If he was here, he used one of them for sure. Perhaps he bought gas or something near the neighborhood of the Fielding home. We need something concrete," he told them. It was time for Della to go to bed now. It was nearly midnight and they had a long night ahead. Paul saw the look on Perry's face. "Hey beautiful, did you bring your car with you? If not, my car awaits you. I need to clean out the front seat of all my papers, so you can come down in about 10 minutes. "Okay," and he smiled at them as he left. Della turned to Perry and put her arms around his neck. They kissed a pleasant kiss goodnight, and after holding each other in their arms, Della headed out to her car. The next morning came early once again, and Della arrived at the office to a large group of the secretaries, talking about something. Usually Della paid them no heed, but this time they called her over to come and see the engagement ring that Gertie had just gotten the night before. It was beautiful, and Della knew that she had been going out with the same man for over 2 years. He seemed like a nice young man, and she was happy to hear about it and see the ring. There would be a lot of chatter in the office for the next few days, she thought. Perry came in at the regular time this morning and smiled at Della as she handed him his coffee. He was sure that the case would be finished that day, and finally he could take Della on the long weekend trip that they had not been able to go on for the past 3 months. Summer would be over and they would still be waiting to go down to San Diego. He had promised Della that as soon as things settled down they would go, and it looked as though they might have a couple of days soon. That morning Paul had started out early in the Fielding neighborhood, showing everyone that was at home the picture of Dennis Gladstone. He had been working for about an hour when he met a man walking his dog. He showed the man the picture and he said that yes, he had seen the man. The picture looked to be the same man he had seen the morning of the murder walking down the sidewalk. He had said hello, and the man had acknowledged him, but he was surprised not to have known him. He had lived in the neighborhood since it was built and knew everyone. Paul took his name and thanked him for the information. His name was Peter Lambert, and he would be more than willing to testify. He had known Jason for years and felt terrible about what had happened to him right in his neighborhood in broad daylight. A shame, a darn shame. Paul continued to knock on doors and leave a note at a house if there was no one there. He would leave a copy of the picture next to the door if he could. Finally, just 1 block over, he came across a lady who had seen the man in the photo the day of the murder, a man that resembled Dennis Gladstone had gotten out of a car in the front of the house and walked through her yard. She remembered him because she had yelled at him and he gave her the bird. Paul had the proof, and he now knew that Dennis Gladstone had definitely been in the neighborhood on the day of the murder. He had 2 good witnesses placing him in the area that day. When Della heard the knock on the door, she opened it to find Paul. "Hi beautiful," he said with a big smile. Paul took a seat in his favorite chair and smiled at both of his friends. "I hit pay dirt today. I have 2 witnesses that are willing to testify that they saw Gladstone on the day of the murder." "Good job," Perry told him, and he clapped his hands together. "Now I have to wait for the messenger to come and deliver the Gladstone's credit card statements, corporate and personal. The messenger should be coming shortly. We will have our answers soon," Perry told them. "You might as well wait, Paul, because once the messenger comes and I have the proof, I will move for dismissal of the charges against Jerry Diamond," Perry told him, and Paul decided to take a break and wait with his 2 friends. The three friends had not had time for much visiting and the chat in the office was light and friendly. Paul Jr. was now on the Little League team and had hit a home run at the last game. His wife was still the love of his life and Paul was tired. He was glad to hear of the upcoming marriage of both Gertie and Lori and Mike. He could hear the girls in the front room giggling from time to time. They had been sitting there in the office about an hour when the messenger came with the package and bank statements and credit card statements for the past 6 months. Perry handed a couple of sheets of the papers to Della and Paul and the three of them went to work. When Della got to the gas card for the business, she found a purchase of gas at a station just down the street from Jason Fielding. The time stamp was 10 m. The coroner had estimated the time of death to be at around 9:15. That was more proof. She handed the statement to Perry and Perry handed it to Paul. We need to look for anything else too. The more proof, the merrier. I do have to bring this to Hamilton, remember, he told his two friends, and they continued to look over the statements. One of the most important finds was a transaction that was made in person at Mr. Gladstone's bank. He had withdrawn $10,000 and within a matter of less than 1/2 an hour $10,000 was deposited into an account belonging to Tara Kirk. The time of the transaction: 11:45 the morning of the murder. Perry stood up and told them that he was sure that they now had enough proof to bring it to Hamilton Berger. He placed a call to his office and his secretary told him that Berger was at court. Perry decided that he would head over to him and see if they could end the case right then and there. Perry started to leave the office and then told his two friends, come on, if it was not for you Jerry could be on his way to jail, he told them with a smile, and the three friends headed over to the courthouse. When the three friends arrived at the courthouse, they found out that Hamilton Berger was in court, but was due to be out within 15 minutes. Please ask him to come here to the private offices for lawyers and their clients. We will be waiting for him. As Hamilton Berger completed the trial, he was informed of Mr. Mason waiting to talk to him. He was intrigued and showed the note to Lt. Tragg, who was there for the trial. The two men walked to the private room and opened the door. They were not surprised to see the three friends sitting there. Things had not been going good with the investigation on their end. It was starting to appear that there was a possibility that Jerry Diamond did not murder his son-in-law Jason Fielding. All of the people in the room shook hands and greeted each other cordially. Tragg and Berger took a seat. I have information that proves that the murderer of Jason Fielding was Dennis Gladstone. I have two separate witnesses that place him in the neighborhood on the day of the murder, and right here is a credit card bill for gas purchased just around the corner from the Fielding home. In this statement I have a copy of a transaction for a transfer of funds of $10,000 to an account belonging to Tara Kirk from Dennis Gladstone. The time stamp is the day of the murder at 11:30 in the morning, not 2 hours after the murder. Here is a copy of the rent-a-car that he rented and a copy of a ticket that was issued to that car on the morning of the murder on the street adjacent to the Fielding home. The lady that recognized a photo of Dennis Gladstone said that he had cut through her yard that day. And she remembered it well because the man had given her the finger. This car would have been parked almost directly across from her house. Perry told them. Hamilton read the papers and agreed with Perry. We need to appear before the judge and make a motion for dismissal. Then we are going to ask the judge for an arrest warrant for Dennis Gladstone. Hamilton told him. It turned out that luck was with them and the judge was still there, and he agreed to meet the two men in his chambers. The judge concurred and dismissed all of the charges against Jerry Diamond, and a warrant was issued for the arrest of Dennis Gladstone. Jerry Diamond was a free man. Perry and Berger walked out of the judge's chambers and shook hands. That was a good job, Mason, and I am sure that Della and Paul were of help to you, So good job to the two of you too. Berger told them, and he and Trag shook their hands, and they then parted company. Della, Perry and Paul shook hands and hugged, that is Della, and left the courthouse as good friends should. When they arrived back at the office, Gertie could not wait to thank Mr. Mason for the large bouquet of flowers that he had given her as a congratulatory gift. She hugged and thanked him over and over. She was so excited, but she had stayed late to thank Mr. Mason. Paul wanted to go home and spend some time with his family, so once again Perry and Della found themselves alone. It was a Friday and the office could live without Perry the next morning. Right now Perry and Della needed to go over to see Jerry Diamond and tell him the good news. When Perry and Della arrived at the clock shop, Jerry saw them and asked if they had good news. We have the best news for you. We found the murderer and you are now a free man. You and I will go to court and officially get you dismissed, but this paper is signed by a judge and you can do whatever you want. Perry told him. Kathy had been in the back and had come out front and thanked them. Who is the murderer? Who murdered my husband? It is a man named Dennis Gladstone. He is Brenda Gold's father. There is a warrant out for his arrest right now. Perry got a ping on his phone and smiled. He has been arrested? All is well. Thank you. How can we ever thank you? Jerry asked them. Just have a good life and keep the clock shop, Perry told him with a smile. With that, Della and Perry walked out the door and headed back to Della's house. When they arrived, Della was greeted by 5 dozen red roses. She smiled and thanked Perry for them. She put her arms around his neck and gave him a big and passionate kiss. There was no one there, but this time they were going to be careful. After just a few moments they let themselves go. Perry asked her, "Did you read the card? Maybe the flowers aren't from me," he laughed. Della opened the card and in the card was enclosed keys to a hotel room in San Diego. The writing said, "To Della, the light and life of my life. Please say yes to a weekend in San Diego." She smiled and told him yes. "Definitely. I have my bags packed." "How long will it take you?" he asked her with a grin. "Just a few minutes, I have been packed for weeks. I will write Lori a note and let her know where I am going, and we will be off to San Diego in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail." And with that she went to her room and grabbed her half-packed suitcase. She put in a couple of extra outfits and she was ready. As she turned, she saw Perry standing in the doorway. He smiled at her and grabbed her suitcase for her. "I am sorry. That is the only room that I have never seen and I had to take a peek." And then the two of them were off for their long-awaited trip. They had been waiting to go to San Diego since the day that Mike had been charged with murder, well over 3 months ago.